Hi Sewing World! Thanks for joining me on my new vlog. I am Kristen and this is the Dahlia Society. Let's hope you can join me on a new adventure. We're going to look into the basics of sewing, why people sew, what kind of things you can sew, how to inject your own personality into your clothing, and we're going to look into future episodes as well. So I hope you can join me for that. I started sewing when I was about 15 because I was a little bit on the creative side, but I also felt a little bit uninspired by what I was looking at in the stores. I worked for a big chain store here in Australia back in the 80s called Treasury, and I remember sewing a little dress that I actually got my mum to help me with because I didn't really know much about it. It was on an old Janome sewing machine and I wore it to work. And I got a compliment off a customer that she wanted to know where I got my dress from. And that made me think, wow, people don't realise this is homemade and that I've made it myself. Maybe I can get away with wearing homemade clothes more often. So got on to being a bit older and worked in retail and had to wear what I sold. So I had to promote their clothing. So I just left the whole sewing thing behind. And then I remember about 5 or 6 years ago, looking at the whole vintage look that I was quite inspired by then. But of course, there was nothing really in my size. I'm about an Australian 14, and a lot of this vintage clothing was aimed at the younger market, which I thought was a little bit sad because women in their 40s like myself, we want to look different. We don't all want to look like grandmas just yet, but we also, a lot of us don't want to wear what our daughters are wearing. We want to put our own style into things and our own personality, and a lot of the prints that I found weren't speaking to me, colours and things like that. So I thought I'll make myself a skirt. So I made a little vintage A-line skirt, and I had a few disasters. I also mucked up the zip, but I wasn't going to let that get me down. I decided to go on some YouTube tutorials. This is the way to go on YouTube and find out how to sew. There's amazing free tutorials on there that you can find. So that was how I got back into sewing again after many years of leaving it. And the whole sewing community is amazing. So it's a place that you want to come to be encouraged by other people. Well, I'm 47 years old. I have 5 children, all of which have nearly grown up. The youngest is nearly 12, the oldest is nearly 23. We live about an hour out of Melbourne in Australia. And we love our life out here in the country. We have a little property that we grow, veggie patch, herbs, and I love growing dahlias, hence my name, the Dahlia Society. I've also got an Instagram called Queen of Dahlias, which I showcase a lot of my makes on there. And speaking of showcasing, I'm really interested in encouraging other makers on this show. So I really want to get on here and show you what the making community is up to each week. I think it's a great way to build each other up and encourage each other. Also, I find that the sewing community has developed now that we've got a lot of different genders that are sewing, different ages, different ethnicities, and I think that's fantastic because it then shows you this whole scope of the sewing community, whereas years ago you didn't want to admit that you sewed because it was mainly frowned upon as being an old-fashioned thing that only grandmas did. If you want to learn how to sew your own wardrobe but you haven't sewed before, this is probably a great place for you to start. I'm going to try and show you the basics of a beginner sewer, what you might need to set yourself up, and also sewing on a budget, because I think it's very important that you realise there's a lot of people on here that don't have the money to set up a whole sewing room. There could be university students, people on a budget, people that really want to sew their own wardrobe but they don't have the funds available. We're also going to look at sustainable sewing and looking at thrift stores and op shops, that we call them here in Australia, for clothing that can be refashioned without wasting fabric that's already there. I'm also interested in bringing you new pattern designers that we can talk about, because I've had a lot of success with sewing independent pattern designers. I've also used a lot of patterns from stores that are the big four, which is Simplicity, Vogue, New Look, and McCall's Bird, that kind of thing. They're all really owned by one big company, and I find that when I sew those patterns, I have to really adapt. That the sizing is way off from what I'm used to in ready to wear, and that's one thing you might have to get used to when you want to start sewing, is that you might be a 14 in ready to wear clothing in a store, but you might look at your measurements and you might be an 18 up top, a 16 in the middle, and a 14 down the bottom, and you've got to learn then how to grade a pattern to fit you. But that's the beauty of sewing, that you can be any size or shape or, you know, height or whatever, and you can then adapt a pattern to fit you that you love. I'm also going to try and educate you guys and also myself, because I'm still learning a lot about different fabrics and what's important to look for when you're shopping for fabrics, and how important it is to read your pattern and look at what the designer had in mind to use for fabrics, because that's one thing that can get people unstuck, is by choosing the totally wrong fabric, and then you have a different garment that does look nothing like what you saw on the packet at the start. So fabric education is very important, and it's also really interesting and fun. I'm going to try and show you guys how to adapt runway fashion, or what's in fashion in high street stores, how to adapt that into what you're sewing. So you might be inspired by certain patterns or colors or styles that are out there, but you want to then be able to put that into wearable clothes that you know you can put in your wardrobe and pick them out each day and feel comfortable in them. So you can use that as inspiration, and that's another fantastic thing about sewing, that you can then use those looks and those images to cater for yourself and for your own size. I'm also going to look at the positive impact on mental health and body image with sewing. That's another fantastic thing with sewing, that you can find that you can get into a sense of flow and a zone that you can then channel out whatever's going on that's chaotic in your life, and you can then look at a set of instructions, and almost like a jigsaw puzzle, it can come together and you can really focus on that. And it can be a form of self-care, meditation, and self-love, and it really does help with a lot of that, and it's a bit of me time as well. Getting back to vintage clothing too, it's a very popular thing at the moment. A lot of people are wanting to replicate certain eras of time and certain wearable vintage patterns. A lot of them are not very practical in this day and age, and a lot of women find that they love that whole look, but they can't get it to suit their shape, or they find it's a little bit intimidating to go out in big skirts and, you know, that kind of thing. But you can choose pieces of wearable vintage that can fit into your lifestyle and your wardrobe. You just need to know how, and it's a kind of thing that you can then adapt to fit in, you know, like a vintage coat with a pair of jeans and heels that can then work for you that way. Don't forget too that you, as a newbie sewist or even an experienced sewist, will always have disasters, and that's the way you learn from things, because without disasters we'll never know then what not to do next time and what fabric we wouldn't choose to sew with again. And a lot of the time I think when people start, they love the whole vintage look and they'll choose quilting cotton, and that doesn't always work really well with making clothing. Some things you can get away with, maybe like an A-line skirt or something that doesn't need to maneuver a lot, but when you're making a top with sleeves and you have fabric that, you know, doesn't have a lot of give in it, you might find that really restrictive to wear. So choosing the right fabric is really important, and we're going to talk about that in a future episode. I'm going to share with you some of my makes, things that have worked for me in the past, patterns that I love as well that I've used over and over again, and hopefully I can get you guys to tell me what's worked for you, and we can showcase that on here as well. Don't forget to click and subscribe if you think any of this piques your interest, and hopefully it does, because I think fashion sewing is the way forward to become more of yourself. Because one thing that you'll find in the sewing community is we don't focus so much on a size that you might find in store, ready to wear, is so important, because the size is actually you. So no one is going to look at your tags and look for a size, because nobody really cares. It's only you that feels that way a lot of the time, that you might be conscious about a certain size. So with sewing, it's just you. The size is you, and we need to embrace that and move forward with that, because it's fantastic for your whole body image and peace of mind. Hopefully you'll join soon. Next week we'll have a new episode, and don't forget to click and subscribe, and we'll see you soon on the Dahlia Society. I'm Kristen. See you next time. Bye.